our minds generally go faster than the resource that we have. And by resource, I mean in like the broadest possible sense, just like time, energy, money, whatever it is, in your own personal life as well. Typically, there are 20 things that I want to do. Realistically, I can do 2.
Hello, dear friends. Welcome to a new episode of Merging Minds, the podcast brought to you and powered by BureauWorks, the translation management system powered by AI. Today, I think I always say it, but is that honestly, I am extremely thrilled today to have here an amazing friend who is one of the most reputed and well-known leaders in the localization industry. And more than that, my friend Chris Dell. Hey, Chris. How you doing, man?
Hey, Javi. I'm fantastic. I'm really
Yeah?
good.
Yeah.
Finally, we have a little bit of summer. It took a very long time to get to us in the the kind of north of Europe this year, but we are finally getting there. Yeah, I'm good. By the way, loving the Led Zeppelin T-shirt.
You see, I get this in
My parents, their first ever date was to go and see Led Zeppelin.
Are you kidding me?
How cool is that, right?
Like you can do this nowadays. Like my uncle.
And their second date was to go see Queen. And this is back when Queen were something. So yeah.
I've seen Queen 3 times, but with Adam Lambert and with Paul Rogers. So it's a different. I didn't have the same opportunity as your parents, my friend. And this is super funny when I talk. Like my passion probably if the people that follow us and hear the podcast is music and football, right? About football, I think you must be a bit sad. I'm just going to hide myself here a little bit because we're recording in in July. It was in July 2024, a few weeks after Spain won the Euro against some country that I don't want to mention.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even thought about that,
yeah. but I wanted to say, those two are my passions. And about Led Zeppelin, like my uncle lived in Switzerland, like in the 70s, and he told me that once he got invited to the Montreux Jazz Festival, and there was a band called
Festival,
yes, they were starting. It's like I didn't like them much because there was a guitar, a bass, and a drum set, and I was like, really, really. Well, dear friends, I'm going to say this small talk about rock and roll. I want to introduce you to my friend, and he's done so much up to this day that I had to write it down. So let me read it, because Chris, for those of you who don't know him yet, recently left Booking.com, and he has had an extraordinary journey at that Booking.com, where he concluded his tenure as senior director of the content agency. His impactful career at Booking is a testament to his dedication, vision, and leadership. On top of that, he's also a coach and an author of books, and you're going to tell us more about that, right? During the time at Booking.com, Chris led a team of 400 people across 45 global locations, which is amazing. Not a lot of people get to do that at a young age, as he's doing. Managing everything from localization and marketing copy to community, content, and geodata. Under his guidance, the team achieved remarkable milestones, including the creation and translation of staggering 400 billion words in 2021 alone. That's amazing. So, I'm going to stop here because there's so much to say about you, my friend. But I want to go to the person, to Chris Dell. And where is Chris Dell from? Where did he start his career? Tell us a little bit about your beginnings, my friend.
I have I've had a very. Thank you for that introduction. I think it's all true. But it sounds so grandiose. My career very, very non-linear. Very as in I couldn't ever have imagined that I would be where I am today when, for example, I graduated. I studied fine art, originally painting. Winchester School of Art, actually, same place that Brian Eno studied. I was always very proud of that because he's also one of my heroes in terms of really kind of revolutionary, innovative kind of thinking, very off the wall. And then I studied history of art in London at the Courtauld Institute, which was it's not the obvious entry point for a career in kind of content and tech and things like that. And indeed, when I graduated, then I worked at the National Gallery for a couple of years, which was fantastic. I was looking after I was curator of a photographic collection there, which was so much fun. Working with paintings, whether they could be exported or not from the country, if they're kind of things of particular national interest or whatever. And then from there, I kind of drifted in, I guess, into kind of publishing. So I worked at the Architectural Association for a couple of years. So I was working with all the kind of Zaha Hadids and people like that, like really, really big name architects, which was fascinating. And then I was working on a weekly publication there. That was a lot of fun. It's just that the energy, the constant kind of movement. And then I worked at Thames and Hudson, a publisher called Thames and Hudson, for about 5 years, where I started as an editor and then ended up being a publisher. Yeah, which was wonderful because there I was working on kind of art books. I was working with people like, I don't know, David Hockney, or Jermaine Greer, Philip Pullman, people like that. I got a chance to edit like some quite big names, which was amazing. And then at some point I said, right, I need sunshine. I'm done with London. I moved to Barcelona, worked in Barcelona as a freelance publisher, editor, got into translation.
Oh
I was
wow.
translating from Spanish and Catalan into English, which I loved. I mean, I always loved the translation work. And was doing that for about 3 years. And I thought, I need I was living just outside Barcelona, and I had this feeling of like, I want to commute. I want to get on a train, same as everyone else, and go to an office every day,
All
which I
right.
know now is a deeply
No,
unfashionable thing. But then I really,
what people don't want right now is exactly that. But that's, hey, I've been living this nomadic life that that I have for the last six
yeah,
years heavily since 2018, and I miss those days of going to the office at least a few days a week. And I'm like, oh my god, I wish I had like more water bowl water conversations. Those things, we just hang out with your friends and your colleagues, and you really create proper relationship there, right? Which I'm sure that you've done a lot and you've grown so big in doing the things that you've done thanks to those that super good skill of relationship building that you had.
yeah, just talking to people,
Yes,
and taking an interest in people around you. I mean,
yes,
I've been very fortunate throughout my entire career. I've always worked with fascinating people. I've also always worked in very, very, very international organizations. And that for me just sparks curiosity every single day. Which yeah. So, and that for me that's my lifeblood. That's what
yes.
gets me out of bed.
So,
So I
so
was so excited then to get the job in booking. That was 14 years ago. And I
okay,
started there as a writer in the
okay.
Barcelona office.
I really like that part you mentioned about that those early days in Barcelona and those
Yeah.
that editing job that you had. Your role, if I'm not mistaken, was editing team leader, right? There. So
Yeah, so within booking, the first year I was a writer. They hired me as a writer, but they also hired me as someone who could potentially grow into some sort of management role. And indeed, after about a year, then they kind of made me a team lead, which was the first time I'd ever managed people. And at this point, I guess I was in my kind of early 30s, let's say, and a bit like, oh, wow, suddenly I have to deal with everyone's demands, emotions,
wow.
desires, dreams, whatever it is. It was a very confronting moment.
Tell me about some challenges that you remember from those early days, because I mean, you are who you are today because you've overcome a lot of challenges. But can you think of, oh my God, I will never forget about this precise moment on those first years?
I think early on, the challenge for me, and maybe for other kind of junior managers, you over empathize. You get so into your team comes to you, or someone from your team comes to you, and they are particularly concerned about something, and you over empathize, and you over sympathize, and actually you probably need to be maybe giving a little bit of guidance, or maybe you need to be a little bit hands on. And there's definitely a moment to kind of listen and to digest, but you can't stay there. If someone is stuck as a manager, and we can talk about coaching later, but as a manager, you have to find sometimes quite directive ways of getting them unstuck. So I think that was something I would just I would simply over empathize with people's problems, because I could understand where they were coming from. I'd been in the same sort of role, and therefore, yeah, okay, I want to support you.
Yes, 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 yes. Like working through leadership coaches that I worked with a couple in the last couple of years, they told me that one of the quote unquote problems, issues that you need to go through if you want to be a proper leader is precisely get over that over empathizing. And it's cruel. It's I found it a bit cruel because of the way I am, because I really like to make friends and to help as much as I can and to connect as much as I can. So it's difficult. It was difficult for me to overcome it, right? And think like, hey, like we're here to make business. It's like,
And this
you're
and
right.
there's a whole journey, right? I mean, that's the beginning of a fascinating journey, because you'll have to learn how to become more directive sometimes and a little bit more top down. But then you also have to start tempering that so you don't become too top down. And then you have to start shifting into a kind of, okay, now I need to empower the team. So I need the team to see that I'm going to have that back and I'm going to give them direction if needed, but I'm also going to give them space when needed. And then you're into this much more kind of interesting, very nuanced journey of leadership where it's like, okay, fine, I'm looking on a per person basis. What's the right level of latitude to give them that they're going to be comfortable with? That's going to be a positive experience for them. So they're not going to drown, but they're also not going to feel too, claustrophobic and stifled by me. So it's that takes, in my experience, months, if not years, to get good at that.
And imagine adding to that mix the fact of working in such a multi-culti and greatly international environment as we do and we live, because we not only work but we live in that environment, right? So
Oh yeah, I mean it's and that was definitely something that I. It was also confronting for me, when I eventually, probably a couple of years later, then became director, and I'm suddenly managing a team of, like you said, that at the point it was probably 300. Eventually, grew to about 500 over the years, but covering I think 60 plus different nationalities, and then you have so many different dimensions in communication, in what people need and how people want to hear particular messages, which I adored. Like that's the stuff I live for because it's quite difficult, and I like stuff that's difficult.
can you think of some challenges in communication that you were like that were difficult to solve? Like we spoke about those challenges in leadership, and once you get to that part, like can you think of some challenges in communication that it was difficult for you to overcome, given that big spectrum of international people you were working with?
I think one of the things that so I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of like oh, when you're in China you need to speak to people like this, or when you're in Japan or when you're in the US or whatever, because I think that there are some great things published out there. I love the kind of Hofstadter kind of approach. There's the culture map and all of there's an awful lot that's kind of been made of all of that. I also believe, by the way, that people are people. It's just that we also have some sort of inherited culture from our background, and there can be many, many, many other axes within that. So I try not to over kind of simplify things. I definitely made many, many mistakes the first time I went to, some of the local teams, and I would ask them for very direct feedback, expecting them to give me extremely direct feedback, and wanting it, by the way, wanting to hear, hey, Chris, this is all the ways in which we're kind of screwing up at the moment. This is what we should be doing. And people didn't feel comfortable saying that because we didn't have the relationship already. So I made many of those kind of mistakes where I have to build the relationship, and eventually then you'll get people to be very open, but only once people are really kind of sure that, okay, this is definitely okay, and this is a safe space. I think one of the biggest challenges always as a leader is how do you deliver bad news?
Yes.
When something is, a project is going to be ended. I've been through moments where I've had to make people redundant, for example, in the past, particularly in kind of COVID times. How do you manage communication around that? Again, in a way that is going to be sensitive to audience. That's incredibly challenging, and that, frankly, is where I leverage the many, many very talented people that I had around me
Mhm.
to make sure that, hey, when I'm going out with a message, that it's going to land, it's going to be clear, it's going to be respectful, it's going to be meaningful, and also that I'm not sugarcoating stuff.
Yeah.
But it's that was always a big challenge.
How does that impact one psychologically when he's a good person? Because I know you are. For me personally, it's very difficult to communicate bad news. How can you do this at the level of management where you were, like to not be hurt, or to deal with the pain the easiest way possible?
It sucks. I mean, and I remember it was many, many years ago now. I mean, more than a decade ago. The very first person I had to make redundant, um, and through absolutely no fault of their own. It was just a transition we had to kind of go through in that moment. Uh, and I communicated it to them, and then I literally went and cried in a room somewhere for about an hour. I was really devastated, and I did what needed to be done, but it takes an emotional toll. Now, over
Mhm.
time, over time you realize that, yeah, but it doesn't end there. That someone leaves, for example, their career doesn't end. Their employment in a particular company or organization ends, but their career will continue elsewhere. And actually, for me, one of the really kind of big wake up moments was we lost some people, and it was a few months later. I actually bumped into one of the people that we lost at a party. They had left, set up their own business. They were now running a fantastic catering business, incredibly happy, incredibly successful. And I realized in that moment, this was brilliant for them. And I'm sure in the moment it was lousy. It was a lousy experience. But ultimately, this was incredibly positive because you know what? I can't look at everything through a very egocentric lens that for as long as people are part of my life, then their lives are meaningful and fulfilled. No, hopefully their lives will always be meaningful and fulfilling, and that they'll go on to many, many, many other better things in the future. So that for me was the context that I needed.
But I
Sorry.
mean, that's once you, but that's very difficult to see it at the moment, right? When it's happening, it's like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned
It's
it being
time.
empathic. You know, also one of the things that I think you're good at expressing as well as a leader is vulnerability, and that's not well. That's not talk. That's not enough talked, and that's something that is coming up more and more now. Like also leaders that are even at high positions and stuff like that show vulnerability, and so like, hey, I don't know how to fucking do this. I'm not good mentally as well. Like, can you help me with this? Like, what is your take on this? Have you had these moments as well?
It's really tough to begin with again because I guess probably when we're young, if you think of like the kind of authority figures that we have in our lives when we're young, I know it can be like kind of police or something like that, or the politicians you see on TV, whatever it is. They always seem to be very serious people and not necessarily kind of super kind of empathetic or kind of vulnerable people. Particularly when you look at politicians, and I don't want to tar all politicians with the same brush, but I mean, a lot of politicians out there are kind of very evasive, a little
Yes,
bit slippery.
yes.
They sometimes feel like they're doing everything they can to kind of hide the truth. And that does, I mean, role models are so important, right? I mean, this is what I realized, over the years. Like, you need people to look up to who are just extremely good. And I was very fortunate in booking, for example. I had a couple of, people, very senior leaders who were extremely good at talking about how they felt about things. And that's really inspiring. And when you see that people are able to do that without consequences, and also you see that the impact that it has in terms of building trust, right? That level of kind of radical transparency and honesty. Hey, you know what? This sucks, and this is how I'm feeling about this. And by the way, these are the things that I've screwed up over the years, and these are the mistakes I've made, and these are the things that I still have to grow in. It's when you see other people role modeling it, you want to do it yourself, and it's still deeply uncomfortable. I mean, I wrote something recently around diversity, and I still remember when we had the terrible murder of George Floyd, for example, back in 2020. Um, and I knew that I needed to talk to it, and it upset me considerably, but I didn't know how to talk to it. And that's again when you leverage people who actually do know how to talk
Mhm,
about to really really big topics and maybe haven't impacted you personally, but do impact you still as a human being.
mhm, mhm.
So I think that's it's learning how to leverage other people's insights and talents and understanding to be able to craft something that's a little bit more authentic, but still bringing the humanity.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
may have digressed a little bit on your
No, no,
on
no.
your
That's,
question.
it's, I'm enjoying when you talk, Chris. I am really enjoying because I told you like I always love to learn from leaders that have done really good stuff, and I always love to learn from you and to hear what you're saying, my friend. So this is good. Through this thing,
I mean, it's good to have role models, and it's good to learn from people who do good stuff. But it's also really interesting to learn from people who do really, really lousy stuff.
yes,
Like
yes,
for example, I mean, LinkedIn has been blowing up recently around the whole Intuit, layoffs, for example, and that's one of
yeah,
those examples of leadership where I look at it and it just makes me so. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but it just makes me so fucking angry
You
because I
can, you
think there's
can
no. And like I try to say that without judgment because I haven't gone deep into this topic and
yes,
I don't know exactly, but on the surface of it, it
yes.
looks like a really lousy way and unempathetic.
I'm so happy
detached
you
way of
said this.
thinking.
I'm so happy you said this because, I mentioned it here, but I want to mention it again because it had such an impact in my life, not in my career, but in my life. Like the first time I went to the job market years ago, it was in the 2008 crisis, and the world was shit. You couldn't get a job. Let's being a Spanish guy from the north of Spain was super complicated. But one of the best things that I will never forget about is during 2009, I had the best, or one of the best bosses I've ever had, Alejandro, who I reach out to him every time I go there because of the impact he had in me, in ways of thinking, of starting one's career, of doing things that I never could think of.
Mhm.
The year after that, I got another internship and I went to Germany for the first time. And I had the worst boss I could ever have. And I remember I was applying this very Spanish expression, which is like, te ahogas en un vaso de agua. You drown in a glass of water,
Yeah.
meaning you make a problem out of everything. It's like this the problem is this, and then I have learned from, and I keep the relationship with one, not with the other, but I have learned from both, right? So I agree with you in the fact that, hey, you have to have a bad boss at some time to say like, holy shit, I don't want to do this. This is people that I like it's flags, right? I don't want to build a career here or close to person like this, right? So
It's the kind of Buddhist side of my brain, which basically says, yeah, well, what do you expect, Chris? You're not going to go through life always getting absolutely amazing bosses. Uh, nobody does. That's not how the world works. You will get, and by the way, that doesn't even mean that they're terrible bosses. It means that maybe they weren't the best boss for you. But it's
yes. Tell me one thing. You participated greatly in the you were in Booking.com for 15 years almost. The growth of Booking.com these 15 years has been incredibly, like, from what
yeah
it was
crazy.
Booking.be and crazy, right, to what it is right now. I just used it yesterday to book an apartment here in Greece. I'm recording from Greece today, so and you participated well in the building of the culture there, in the localization, internationalization, globalization department as well. Did you follow any strategies? Did it come from your heart? Tell me a little bit about that, how you helped that creating that culture.
Yeah, the culture building thing was fascinating. I mean, you have to remember early on Booking. When I joined Booking, it was less than 2,000 people, and it was one of those we don't quite know whether we're going to survive. We think we are, but we're definitely not the largest travel platform in the world, which I think it is now by most measures. And that meant that we were focused all the time on just kind of growing and surviving and just kind of getting certain kind of systems and things in place. And yes, we had a culture. We had many years ago, we had the formula before I even turned up, which was very much around kind of how we execute. But I think we also realized at some point, okay, that deals with how we execute, but we also need to, how do we relate to each other? And what are our principles and what are our values? So that's where I started kind of getting involved. And I was super fortunate. I'd only been in the company probably like 2 or 3 years. I was at that point reporting into the chief operating officer, and the CEO was taking a huge interest in, okay, we need to define a culture. So I kind of got roped into that because I was a writer. It's like, Chris, you're a writer. So write some values. So I worked with a couple of really fantastic colleagues from HR, but we also realized very quickly that culture, yes, of course, it's part of it is top down, because a business ultimately has to be led by a vision, and the vision is ultimately then it's a strategy which is owned by a CEO, right? And the CEO has a right to say this is what the strategy is, and then everyone needs to decide whether they're on board with it or not. But when it comes to culture, so part of it is top down, but also part of it has to be, yeah, but what's made us strong so far? So we actually went through a really interesting process of interviewing people, running workshops, because we realized that, okay, it's not actually for Chris to write the values or anyone from HR or whatever. It's for us to crowdsource what we think has made us incredibly strong. And also then, you be selective. What do you want to see more of in the future? What do you want to see less of potentially? And the reality is, as a company grows, and then Booking has just grown and grown and grown and grown over many years, it has to go through many evolutions,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
suddenly you wake up one day and there are 15,000 people, and you all have to communicate with each other in quite a different way, in the way that you organize yourselves from a strategic perspective, but also just in terms of kind of objectives. Maybe now collaboration matters considerably more than it used to in the past. We can't just kind of run in our swim lanes anymore. We actually need to think about a bigger picture. And just going from a single vertical platform, which is what booking was when I joined. It was, we have accommodations, to now there's accommodations and there's flights and there's car rentals and there are attractions, things to do, and insurance and a whole bunch of different verticals. Then the culture has to change as well. So yeah, it was a really nice kind of analytical, little bit of creativity, fusing it all together and then turning it into something which 3 years later then has to be revised because the company has changed again.
Yes, or things might go downhill or wrong, right? And how do you redefine?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
think of, yeah. I mean, that was one of the, like, on my end. I don't have the experience of having worked in such a big multinational with 15,000 people. Like, I think I've worked with organizations that have like 100 subtops, something like this. That's my profile. I feel comfortable in those environments, but I've seen also things going wrong and culture like being poisoned and things like, oh my god. So I can imagine how difficult it is, like, to do this at a level of 15,000 people, and hey guys, like,
Mm.
we have a problem, we need to change things. How do we do these things? How do we communicate? How do we make sure, like, hey, the strategy is this one, please stay engaged, right? So
And from a leadership perspective, it's fascinating because
yes.
sometimes people have kind of asked me, hey, I was in the same role, leading the same department for 11 years, right? It's a very, very long time. Um, and I'm sure some of the people in the department wouldn't have minded if they changed leader at some point. But for me, it was always, yeah, but the business is changing, and the stakeholders that I work with are changing constantly, and the team is changing, and our approach needs to keep changing. And for me, that's enough change. Like, I am always being stimulated. I'm always being challenged. I'm always having to grow because something different is being demanded of me every year, and that, again, that's what I live for that growth, for that learning, for that. Oh shit, I don't know how to do this. Okay, I learn how to do it. Now the rules change again. Now I have to
But I
learn
just
again.
hope everyone would think like you, my friend. Things will be easier at those corporate levels, right? Maybe. Like,
Yeah,
if
but
people were more
you also need
flexible,
to.
right? So
I have a mindset, but I've also come to appreciate that it's good that you have people around you who move at different speeds. I've worked with people who think and move a lot faster than me. I've worked with people who move a lot slower than me. Both have huge amounts of value because they will pull me in one direction or other. They will challenge me, and sometimes they'll be a lot more sensible than me. So yeah.
this like since you left a few months ago, yeah, like, I followed you not only because you're a friend, but also because of the great things you write about. And one of the things that you were writing recently about on LinkedIn, articles that you published on LinkedIn about your 14 years of learning in booking.com, right?
Mm,
Like, something that caught my eye was like, you speak up in one of those articles about cultivating ownership, right? If I'm not mistaken, you were writing about this recently, and you speak about the importance of ownership in purpose. And I want to ask you, how do you cultivate a sense of ownership among your team members regarding their contributions to the company purpose? That's a very deep question and difficult, but
yeah, but actually, it got easier over the years, because the better defined the company purpose is, then for me, and I was running a department which content, so let's say localization was one of the kind of tracks that I was overseeing. Localization is supporting every single part of the business. I think we had like over 100 different stakeholders across different parts of the business. And it's everything from kind of legal through to kind of product teams through to, kind of various kind of commercial and marketing teams. So you have to move with the business. Your purpose comes from the company's purpose. Your objectives are set by the objectives of your stakeholders, and the more you key into that, and there's probably 20% where you're, hang on, this is who we are. Also need our own identity, and we've also got a couple of things that we're very passionate about. For example, machine translation or something like that. I've been investing in for many, many years. That wasn't something that the business was asking for. It was something that I saw back in 2016, and not just me. Many other people saw, hang on, this is something really interesting that we should start investing in, because over time it's going to allow us to kind of leverage all the data sets that we already have, do something really, really kind of cool, probably bring down costs. And that was completely true. And we were able to do all sorts of kind of cool things. 80%, however, of our purpose needs to come from the company purpose and that of the stakeholders. Now, the critical thing is that purpose needs to go all the way to the bottom. And when I talk about purpose, I don't mean that people should live for their employer.
Yeah,
I
that,
think we've all
that's.
been in there.
I think that
Um,
depends on the moment of your career where you are, because there's moments
oh,
in where you're
I've done
more
it.
independent, or
Yeah,
like, or you're probably.
absolutely.
I don't know, or maybe I think that you're young. It's like, oh, it's my first job. I live for this thing, and then you get a disappointment or whatever, or you're older and you're like, oh my god, I gotta stick to this thing until my retirement. I don't know. Those are, you know.
It's something that I've definitely kind of shifted my perspective on over the years. I mean, it's really important to find something that you're passionate about for sure. And my attitude has always been, hey, if I find something I'm passionate about, I know myself, I will lean in a little bit more, and I will probably work a few more hours than I should, etc. Because hey, this really motivates me and it matters to me in my life. But everyone needs to figure that out for themselves. And you have to balance that with then the kind of demands of the company. I'm not even talking about booking.com. Frankly, I've worked in other environments which were considerably more demanding. Something like publishing, considerably more demanding, considerably longer hours. I would routinely be in the office until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, when I was kind of in my kind of mid 20s, because indeed I thought this is what I need to be doing. I need to be showing that I'm basically going to kill myself in this office. Yeah, these days I'm not convinced about that. I'm much more interested in kind of sustainability and make your passion sustainable. And let's keep the knowledge within the company. Let's not burn people out and kind of push them out in a couple of years' time. Again,
Just
I've digressed from whatever question you asked, I'm sure.
fine. I'm learning. I hope that you guys are also learning, because I think this conversation is really super interesting. And what you're writing, I'm reading it. I'm a vivid reader of your ideas and your post. There's another one that caught my eye as well, and you were talking about the balance between innovation and prioritization as well. You wrote
Yeah, yeah.
recently about it as well, and you mentioned balancing innovation with available resources. How did you manage this balance in your strategic planning and decision making?
Yeah, it's super hard, and indeed people can follow me for sure and go and have a look at the posts on LinkedIn. I never used to write anything on LinkedIn at all. To me, I'm one of those people. For as long as I'm busy at work, I'm not gonna think about LinkedIn.
Once
But then
again,
when I
times of
left
your
booking
career, man.
earlier,
Times
I'm
and
like,
times of
well,
your
actually,
career.
I kind of want to, share a little bit some of these insights, because just in case they are kind of helpful for other people. But indeed, the last couple that I posted around prioritization, um, innovation, ownership, etc. Prioritization is a really interesting one because, again, we had multiple tracks. And whenever you're trying to prioritize across multiple tracks, it's always apples to pears to oranges to kiwi to whatever fruit you like, and it's super hard. And again, you have to go back to, okay, what matters most to the business. You have to go back to the kind of Pareto principle, which was always part of bookings culture and which still gets talked about a lot today. You have to ask, where are the kind of critical dependencies. There are a whole bunch of different things you need to go through. I mean, one of the things I learned over the years is, only ever optimize for the biggest bottleneck. Because if you take any kind of system, tool, process, whatever, typically there are multiple bottlenecks, but a process will only move as fast as the slowest bottleneck.
Yes.
Find that only ever optimize one bottleneck at a time, and because then you can see what happens when you've untied that bottleneck, and then you'll see where's the next biggest bottleneck.
That's
That's a
that's
smart way of doing it. Yeah.
and that is one of the. And sorry to have jumped in, but this just remembered
No,
me.
no.
Just reminded me of one of the first teachings that I got from this first boss that I mentioned a few minutes before, about when there's a lot of troubles that come up in any situation at work or whatever, just do one. Just do one. Don't try to do 25. And this is difficult for me, for a person like me, that is very difficult to focus on one single thing. I'm trying to do it. It's hard. It's very difficult. Sometimes I can, sometimes I cannot. But it's one advice that I think you've greatly given to the followers of the podcast. So
Our minds generally go faster than the resource that we have. And by resource, I mean in like the broadest possible sense, just like time, energy, money, whatever it is, in your own personal life as well.
yes,
Typically, there are 20 things that I want to do. Realistically, I can do two. And that's an ongoing challenge for me.
Chris, you're amazing. Thanks for sharing all this stuff. And now I want to talk a little bit about the future before saying bye. Because what is the future holding for Chris Dell now? Like after 14 years in Booking.com, what a great experience it's been for you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is the first time that I'm not working in 26 years. um, right. So, which, which for the first kind of couple of months, I was just plagued by kind of guilt. It's like I have to be doing things. Um, but actually, I've come to really kind of appreciate, okay, I have a bit of time and headspace to actually kind of do all the kind of really interesting going on yoga retreats, doing meditation, which I always promised I would do. I would meditate every single morning, and now I
I'm
actually
doing it
meditate
now.
every
I'm doing
morning.
it for the last 2 years. I'm doing meditation in the morning for the last 2 years. Yeah, it helps your anxiety, right? Like
It makes it makes a huge difference, and it's one of
that's
those things that for as long as you're, you know, when you're busy, I can't find time to meditate. And then I remember years ago, I was actually doing a course on meditation at the Buddhist University in Chiang Mai, in the, you know, in the kind of central north Thailand, and the monk said, you should meditate ideally for like 20 minutes every day, unless you don't have time, in which case meditate for 40 minutes.
that's
It's like
interesting.
that's probably the single most difficult thing I will ever in my life. But I'm finally kind of finding that time, and I'm asking this kind of interesting question. Hey, if I were to, you know, you have a glass, that's your life, right? That's your capacity, that's your energy. Typically we start by kind of putting in work, and then we say, okay, now how much time do I have for everything else? What happens if you do it the other way around? What happens if I start by saying, hey, 10% is keeping fit, 10% is reading, you know, 15% is whatever, and then how much do I have left for work?
Like
It's never.
on my end, I'm privileged, and I say it, and I said it all the time. And I will always say it because I've been able to build a life, a work around my life, and not many people can do this. So that's whenever people ask me, "Do you want to do you want to work somewhere?" Like, no, I just want to live the life I'm living now. But that's my case. Eh? That's a little bit like
I'm a realist. We
yes,
need to work. We need to earn money. You know, we have
yes,
rent. We have mortgages to pay. We have, you know, the fine. Let's be
yes,
realistic about this.
yes.
But I think all of us, just as human beings, have more autonomy and more power than we often give ourselves credit for. And it's also for us to set those kind of healthy boundaries. And I've always respected people who set kind of healthy boundaries at work. Yeah, because it's these are, again, it's about kind of sustainability, and that's what you want as a leader.
In this career transition, this last question I want to ask you, my friend. Uh, which skill are you planning to learn on this new or on this way? Which skill are you
That's right. You
planning
were
to?
asking me about career transitions. I didn't remotely answer your question, but okay, doesn't.
It's fine.
Um, I think so. There are kind of a couple of skills. The first one, reading. This is a really kind of strange skill, but I mean, I'm someone who I buy a lot of books. I read very few books. I think in the past, probably like 3 4 years.
I got this the other day and I haven't opened it
Ha, right. Okay. Oh, nice.
in London.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to hear about
Okay,
that.
I'm gonna open it here on camera. Okay, just open the book. Okay, so I empathize with you, my friend.
So I'm someone who buys. I buy a lot of books in airports. I used to travel a huge amount, and uh, books in airports basically you kind of have like sort of trashy thrillers, or you have business. You know, like HBR. You know, kind of books and things like that. So I bought a lot of HBR books over the years. They're very worthy books. They're books that I feel I should be reading. Most of them haven't been read. They've been dipped into on a plane for half an hour before I thought, all right, screw this, and I just want to watch a movie. So I'm actually now kind of taking time to learn how to read again. And it's actually about like getting focus and deep concentration, and I was really happy just recently. And it was a few weeks ago, I sat on the sofa and I actually sat down, I opened a book and I finished the book in a couple of days. And I'm like, wow, okay, I haven't done this in years. um, but also books that aren't actually, you know, that I don't need, but I'm simply interested in. So I think just kind of finding stuff that I'm kind of genuinely curious about, that has been a really kind of big thing. I think that's on one hand, and on the other hand, I'm really picking up my coaching again. I trained as a coach last year. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about, but it was also something that I kind of just put on hiatus for a few months. But now I'm starting to pick that up again, and that's intensely rewarding. because it's I don't want to be too dramatic, but it's the death of ego. It's no longer about me. It's no longer about what I want. It's all about the client, and that's incredibly liberating. So I kind of feel like I'm using the headspace for that. Oh, I'm writing a book as well about prophecies and omens.
Oh, nice, nice, nice.
I yeah, I write generally about the last book I wrote was about witchcraft and magic and the occult. So I'm
Oh, I
generally
love it.
interested in kind of weird stuff.
So you're writing the seventh part of the Omen, right? Like where Damien is already a grandfather or something like this, right?
This is a very scholarly, very academic book. The history of I'm going back to ancient Mesopotamia and all these.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Amazing things that people would kind of believe in. You
All
go
right.
back to kind of Assyria and ancient Babylon. You've got these like lists of like 10,000 different omens you have to watch out for. We think our life is difficult now. Apparently, it was even harder then. Whether a cat walks left to right in front of you or right to left has completely different meaning. So
Oh, Chris, it's amazing to have to have had you here today. Like I am, like this has been a special conversation with you and a special talk. Thanks so much for your time, my friend. Like I cannot wait to have a beer with you next time I see you. Like thanks
absolutely.
so
When you were in
much.
Amsterdam.
Yes, yeah. I was there recently. Unfortunately, you were not in town, but I owe you a visit, a beer, and a great time of catch up. Really, not through internet, but face to face, my friend. So
In person. Excellent.
in person,
Love
in
that.
person. Thanks so much. I hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation as much as I've done. Chris is a real role model. Is a top leader. Please go follow him on LinkedIn. And I mean, if Chris, if you want to say some words where people can find you as well.
Yeah, no. LinkedIn's a great starting point, and I say this to people all of the time, but then no one kind of believes me. But like, ping me, start a conversation. You want to have a chat. I like so something else I actually have time for at the moment. I talk to people
I
with
did
no
this to you
goal
when
whatsoever.
when you had less time. I remember doing this to you like 3 4 years ago when you had less time and you replied.
Yeah,
So he doesn't have a job
people are
now. Do it.
fascinating.
It's your moment. If you want to reach out to Chris. Chris, bye bye, my friend.
Excellent.
Have a good day.
Take care,
And
Javi.
thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks so
Thanks for
much.
being there. Soon in another episode of Merging Minds. Bye bye.
Bye.